Hey, this is Harold Goldberg from the New York Video Game Critics Circle. We are here today with Abubakar Salim, the awesome creator of Tales of Kenzera which is just such a deep game in many ways. And we're also here with Kimari Rennis. So Kimari has been our intern and then senior intern and now assistant mentor for since she was 14. And Kimari is now about to graduate from NYU's Game Center. So I would like to just say briefly, check out nygamecritics.com for all the reviews that you may want to use. We focus on indies here, and 95% of our game reviews are written by underserved and unhoused students. So go to nygamecritics.com and check it out. But right now we have the opportunity to speak to an auteur, and we'd like to get a bit of your backstory before we go forward into Zao. So you grew up in Hertfordshire in England, and I don't get to England that much, but I do know that area goes back to Roman times when there's a place called Six Hills, which is historical, and there's also a well-known movie studio there where they did some Harry Potter and Spider-Man. But what was growing up like there for you? What, aside from playing games, which we know in every interview that you do, and that's awesome, what was life around you like? So when we look at Zao, we say these awesome environments, but what was your awesome environment like, or not so awesome environment?
No, it was interesting. I think my parents moved there. Essentially, it was the choice between either London or Welwyn Garden, right? Which is where I grew up, and I think they chose Welwyn Garden City because it was one. The area is a lot calmer to a degree. It isn't as bustly as London is. It was a lot easier to get me into a school there. And even though, the area wasn't necessarily as diverse as it was, back then, there was almost like this sense of, at least, my son has a garden that he can play in and he can play out at the front, and kind of enjoy that. So that was, that really was the mentality and for the big reason as to why we were there. And, my upbringing was again, as I say, an interesting one in the sense that I was, there was a bit of racism and it was a bit rough, grew up in a council house and that kind of thing. So there was an element of that. But I was, again, sort of fortunate enough to, to have parents who kind of kept me busy and kept me in doing other extracurricular stuff rather than necessarily getting into fights as I probably would have done when I was, at that time. So it was, the upbringing and space was lovely. It had its shades of greatness as well as, kind of a bit of sadness, but at the same time, it's definitely made me the man that I am today growing up there.
I just remember talking to you when you mentioned garden. I just think of Mr. Miyamoto from Nintendo, who got so much inspiration when he was in his kind of backyard garden. Did any of that? I know that Africa is tons of places, tons of miles away from England, but was there any inspiration from your house and garden in the game at all, or was that completely different?
No, I would say essentially the big pull was, I wouldn't necessarily say it was an inspiration, but more so a sense of like what I wish my house was. So, I think, the game actually, it starts within this sort of, futuristic setting, this modern setting,
Yeah.
and it's full of paintings, and it's, it's very vibrant, it's colorful, it's full of life. And where I grew up, it wasn't really like that. It was quite, it was very almost practical. And and we had either a painting or something that kind of reminded us of home, of Kenya, but we didn't necessarily, but again, it was very much like, okay, it's better to put a board here to remind us of, when our doctor appointments are, rather than putting a painting, you know what I mean? Like, there's not much space here. So it was very much, something that really inspired me, especially within the game, is to make a space that felt like, oh, this is the home that I wanted to grow up in, or that I wanted to be in. In my room, there would, in Zuberi's room, the character's room, there's all these posters of cool stuff and things that he loves. I didn't have that really. I kind of switched between, one room and another, really, to kind of just keep everything exciting as growing up,
Sure. And, I guess it's the difference between utilitarian and luxurious or lavish, because when you go into that futuristic setting, if you instead of going into the house, you can go to your right and check out the awesomeness of the city below. And then when you do go in, from the moment you step in, you see the essence of Africa.
Yeah.
And from pottery to paintings. So that is awesome and beautiful. And we'll get to more of that. But this inspiration for a lot of Zhao is your father and your father's passing. When you think of your father, what moves you most about him?
I think it was his patience. I think his sense of, whenever he had, I always say this, he had a very great way of telling stories. He was a very patient man, and he wasn't necessarily the guy who wanted to be the center of attention, but he was very good at capturing you in the stories in which he tells. The quiet guy in the corner who, when they do open their mouth, everyone falls silent, that kind of guy. And yeah, I'd say that really was something that, that really sticks to me. And I'd say almost the second thing as well, which is equally as important, was he exuded a sense of not necessarily, of no judgment, of no sense of making me feel either like one way is right or one way is wrong. He allowed me to explore, to a degree, of course. And I think that was something that, again, I put down to my artistic sort of freedom and license to kind of play comes down to my father not necessarily making me feel like I was a fool when I was younger, And I think that really was key and instrumental to me being me.
Yeah, I think that with I would venture to say, and I won't at all speak for Kimari, but your mom was really influential to you, and my mom was very influential to me in letting me figure things out for myself and ultimately become a writer. And Kimari, I know that your mom was always pro what you wanted to do as well. So I think not all of us are blessed with parents like that, but it's awesome when we are, and it just makes it more difficult when they do pass. But what I was going to ask now is, what was it about the Bantu myths that moved you to feature a game around them? So the game is a Metroidvania and also has all the bells and whistles around them, except through this awesome African lens. And again, we'll talk about that. But it's the myths that, as a writer, really get me going. And can you talk about what it was about them, and also how you can kind of find and get deeper into those myths through what you discover in the game.
Yeah, I think so. The thing that really, it's stayed with me when it came to even like researching and looking into Bantu myths is the fact that they are completely, they're driven by oral storytelling. So it's the storyteller has all the power, right? They are telling you the story and you have to listen to them, and they can add their own details, or they can, tell it as is. And I think that there's something really beautiful about that. Again, it's this element of play. It's told around, a fire or shared, again, orally, that communication that happens between, people, essentially. And there's something about, again, as all myths are, right? They are lessons, and you can learn something from them. I think the one thing that I do find fascinating about Bantu myths in particular, with the fact that they are oral storytelling, essentially driven by oral storytelling, is that the person can kind of flavor the lesson that they want to teach you or tell you. And so, that's something that really gripped me. And, these stories, the legends are so rich. The mythologies are so rich. The gods and the creatures are, there's so many shades of colors to them. They're not just all evil or all good. Like they almost feel human and as complex as humans are. And I think like that's what really gripped me. I mean, like, look at Kalunga, for example, in a lot of sort of, in the sort of the Congolese sort of cultures, Kalunga is not only a being, but it's also a place, very much like Hades. And then when you read the myths as well that kind of have Kalunga in them, Kalunga isn't necessarily this almighty being. They are kind of depicted in a way that is also as human as you are. And I think that's what's really telling and really powerful about these myths, is that even the gods themselves make mistakes. And by having that sort of element of almost equality, it just adds this level and layer of play there that you can really dive into and take from and learn from. And I think like that's why, that was something I remember when my father would tell me all these stories about, his father, who was an Nganga, who would talk to spirits and whatnot, and all these other, kind of really cool elements. The one thing that was, really striking for me was how inviting and enticing it was. It wasn't necessarily that was then and now this is now. You know what I mean? This is a world that I can never be in. It almost felt like I could be in this world. And I think like that's what I love about Bantu myths and legends, is it is so accessible when told and shared.
And the different shades of each character in the myths comes to fore pretty much early in the game too. There's the little girl, and you can see, I don't want to spoil anything, but you can see the way he deals with her may not be the exactly right way to deal with her.
Yeah. And that's again the beauty of play here and the beauty of storytelling. It really is. It comes down to it's a celebration of stories, and I think like that's why I really wanted to dive into it, is because again, there's nothing more beautiful than being told a really cool story.
Kimari, would you like to ask some questions?
Oh, absolutely. I'm absolutely loving the game. I'm glad you bring up that like your father's inspiration as like a really great storyteller and someone who's patient. It's very evident in the game from the beginning to all throughout the game. It's just really, really good, captivating storytelling. And I felt the same way about the little girl, how when you're listening to a really great story, regardless of your perspective, because I haven't lost a family member in my life yet, but it gives you the clarity to see there's irony there. Like there are lessons to be learned, and I find that really awesome. But I do have some really great questions. So as a game to honor your father, what was the experience of creating a prototype, workshopping it, and pitching the idea to become, EA original?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's a funny one because, I kind of started this journey with this mentality of like, this had to be a game and I had to get it made. So gathering a team. Like, I didn't even know what a prototype was. I had no idea what that was. I was just like, we just have to, just get it on sticks and see how it works. But I remember being, the team were essentially asking like, no, but what is like the hook, the grip? What is the thing that's going to make this game? What do you want to explore essentially? Right. And for me, that was the mask switching. It was the idea of getting this feeling of being able to wear these different masks and then being able to be switched on the fly. There wasn't a weapon wheel or anything that was kind of blocking you that way. So that was like our core thing to get, right? And to hit on, because to me, again, that was supposed to represent this idea that we wear many masks, especially when we're going in our lives, but especially when you're grieving. You've got your professional mask, you've got your kind of personal mask, and then you've got your own mask that you wear at home. And so it was, that we had to capture that feeling of being able to switch these masks on the fly and be able to interact with the world differently depending on the mask that you had. And so when it came to pitching to EA, again, the story it's a different one, because I really went to EA with this idea. First of all, I was forced in with EA. A friend of mine who was working at EA, he, without me knowing, slipped my game ideas and scratchings and concept art to the team over at EA, at the EA Originals team. And they were like, oh, we'd love to have a meeting. So I was kind of pushed into this.
Very nice.
I was pushed into this thing without my knowledge. Anyway, what ended up happening, though, is when it came to pitching to EA, the first meeting really was about telling them about the story, where it was coming from, why I wanted to do this, and what the mechanics were essentially that I wanted to explore. And that is at the crux what a pitch is. Now, it wasn't necessarily the pitch that they were expecting with the pitch deck and everything and all this jazz. That came much later. But at the beginning, I had to essentially explore and express what I wanted to build and why I wanted to build it. And that really is the core and key thing, right? It doesn't matter, whether it was, in the Bantu mythology aspect or, even about grief. Ultimately, it was about what you're trying to convey on a gameplay perspective and why. And I think like that's what really sold them and like hooked them. And so then when I went into the actual detail about and it's going to be, told from the perspective of like this Bantu lens, it's going to be, it's going to be a Metroidvania because it's, for me, it's all about grief. Like it's that those elements added to the reasonings as to why okay, we can go ahead with this. So it sort of built naturally, but again, it stemmed from this inspiration of wanting to do something that came from the heart and, respected games as an art form rather than necessarily as a product in a way. Like, at the end of the day, it will be a product that you kind of give to people and, people will have to buy it from a store and everything. But, in the same way that film is, there has to be an emotional and human reason as to why I need to be spending, be it either, 1 hour or 100 in this world that you are conjuring and giving to me.
That's beautiful. And I can imagine, like, you put your heart and soul into this game. And there are differences between, games that, can convey those emotions and games that do not. And like you have that emotion in your game. It's very beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
So congratulations on, being with EA Originals. Your game's going to come out soon. It's going to be fantastic. I'm glad I got an early copy.
Amazing.
But another question. So, making games can be a pretty, daunting task, especially when it's, like something that you really, really want to do. You have to make this game. What was the process of assembling this team to make the game? Like, what was the process of, creating that studio, bringing people on?
It was, again, really not conventional. Because I've not got a games background, right? I'm an actor. Normally my job is to turn up on set, do my lines and then leave. Probably eat some food too. But like genuinely, like it's not really one of those ones where you're going to be talking to a lot of game developers, basically. Yeah. What I was very lucky though to have been exposed to was when I worked as an actor on Assassin's Creed Origins playing Bayek. It introduced me to the producers and it introduced me to some other developers as well. And essentially all I did was just start asking questions. I asked questions. I asked too many questions, and there's actually no such thing as too many questions. I just asked everything. I wanted to talk to everyone, get their experiences, talk to people who have started studios and kind of are successful, talk to people who have sold studios, talk to people who've started studios and it didn't necessarily go through. And I just wanted to kind of soak in all this knowledge and this ideas and learnings and, what teams to build. Through that, I ended up essentially being like, okay, well, who, is there anyone that you'd recommend for me to chat to who might be interested in joining? And it just sort of led me down this, crazy path of, messaging people on Twitter or LinkedIn or ArtStation, basically, trying to convince them to jump on this mad journey that this actor wants to do and essentially making a game. But again, I think the core team and the way that the team has been built really started with this drive of respecting the artist as in game development and seeing games as an art form and wanting to tell something really cool and something that's really honest and truthful and authentic. And I think that's essentially how I built that team. It was by pulling at their heartstrings.
May I ask a question here? Because as you talk about the team, I'm a big fan of Danita's work, the composer for the game, who also worked on Immortality and gave us a fair amount of her time to talk about what she did with that game. How did you come across Danita? And this seems like a lot bigger production than what she did with Immortality. Oh, that was awesome as well. But can you just talk about how she became a member of the team and what she brought to the game?
So I loved her work in Immortality as well. And I was fascinated by the music that she was conjuring and making. I could feel that there was something really cool there. And it was, again, just me messaging her out of the blue and being like, hey, I love your music. Would you like to make the music for our game? And I brought her in really early. And I think that's what really surprised her as well, was that, she actually came in even before EA. She was there from inception. And, normally you bring in a composer like last minute or just right near the end. But Nanita saw the evolution of this game and where it started and where we were going and what we wanted to play with. We had a lot of time to conjure and work together in regards to what was the soul of what this music was. And we came to the conclusion that it was going to be almost this clash of different perspectives, or this clash of different generations. You've got the sense of, the fantastical world of Kenzera that the father has conjured in the book. And then you've also got Kenzera, which is of Zuberi's sort of perspective and mind frame. And what I really wanted to capture is this clash of, you've got almost like modern music and traditional. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they don't. When you hear the drums and then you hear something go, you hear the synths, it doesn't make sense, but then it suddenly does. And then wow, they're working in unison, which I think is a lot about, again, it's communication. In a lot of Bantu cultures, especially when it comes to looking at death, it's about, you find yourself almost communicating more so with that person after they have passed, rather than you would have when they were, whether they were here. And for me, I'm fascinated by that, because it's this sense of, how do you communicate with the dead? How do you kind of, pass messages or even get answers? And I think for me, it's through many things. It's through music. It's through the old books that they've left with us. It's through the lessons that they taught you beforehand that suddenly make sense now. And I think that was something, we were talking about a lot with Nanita and trying to capture that with the music as well, kind of having these motifs come through and having callbacks as well. As you get deeper into the game, you'll learn and realize oh, wow, okay, there is, I've heard this track before, but not in this context,
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, this game seems very personal to you, and also with its execution, it can also touch the hearts of a lot of other people. Now that the game has been made, what has Zhao Tales of Kenzera done for your grief? Or, what does that mean now that it's closer to release?
Yeah, it's again, it's something that I don't necessarily feel. It's made me also realize very, through the journey of creating this game, that grief isn't something that you can kind of accept and move on and get over. It will always stay with you. And, the longer you spend time with it, however, and the longer you acknowledge it, the more comfortable you get with it. And it's like, and to me, it's, something that it's kind of done with me, and sort of looking at my sort of relationship with my father, it's strengthened it. It's allowed me to almost, see it as a creative fuel source to pull from a place that is authentic and that is truthful. And I feel like, one of the things that one of the big lessons I've learned during not only the creation of this game, but also just reflecting, back on my father and what that meant to me in his passing, it's meant that I've had to be very vulnerable to my team and be honest and truthful. And it's only by doing that, by not putting my guards up, that we're able to actually fully create and fully explore not only the game development side, but also just communicate with one another. People then share a side to them that you wouldn't necessarily have heard, or even, they wouldn't have wanted to share normally if that opportunity didn't arise. Something that really, stuck with me was when I announced at the Game Awards that we were making this game. But from my way back from the actual, the venue to our hotel, the amount of people who stopped me in the street just to share and just be like, thank you so much. Like, I remember feeling this and, feeling moved by this. And like, these people I never would have known, beforehand. Yet here we are actually communicating on an equal level. And I think like that was what was really powerful, is that sense of like, yes, this thing is very universal and we're sharing this with one another.
Yeah, I think it's gorgeous that you really, turn this situation into art, and art that you can share with other people to draw out those emotions and communicate with them. There are a lot of inspirations that you can see in this game. How do you translate your inspirations from real life, such as music, your culture, into the game? What is the process for recreating the beauty and composition of the inspirations in your life to form the mythical world of Zao?
Yeah, I'd say it kind of comes from reacting, right? I think like for me, okay, so put it this way. So something that I realized as I was sort of going through walks of life and going through, elements, and even this was before my father passed, but it kind of really, it was much clearer after he did, was these masks that you would wear as you'd go along in life, right? You would wear a different mask if I was rehearsing in a theater, for a play, than I would if I was talking to my mother, than I would if I was talking to my friends. And this fascinated me because it almost made me feel like, oh man, I've got this feeling behind all this stuff that I can't share or talk about really. I have to put on this mask. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of those feelings that that really stuck with me. And I was like, okay, how do I translate this into a game, right? And what it did essentially was it kind of answered it for me, right? In the sense of like, okay, you have this thing where you're changing between these different masks that adorn either, as I said, like the sun and the moon, life and death, that you're wearing in order to kind of face the obstacles that you do. Because, the conversation, I could be talking to you now, my mother would call me and I have to put on a different mask there. It has to be instant. It can't be something that you have to prepare or think about. Mm-hmm. And so like that was something that really was, was really important for me to capture. So, and it begins that way. So that's like one aspect of it all. The idea of even like the Metroidvania genre, like I pull from essentially this idea of grief. Like it makes sense for it to be grief. It couldn't be anything else because, when you look at a Metroidvania, you're thrown into the middle of something that you have no idea about. You're lost. You're isolated. You have to take your time in order to kind of get to grips with everything. And there are tons of secrets hidden there, but it's always been there. And I think like that again is what grief is, and what when you're going through that journey of grief, and it's that sense of, I have to discover this on my own, even though it is something that everyone will go through. And so that's, these are the elements that you kind of pick and play. And sometimes you might stumble into something that might make sense personally, but wouldn't necessarily communicate very well artistically. And that's, something that I remember, one of the big things in fact, speaking of music, when we started this game and the game development, we were really keen on making it quite rhythmic, having the music influence the attacks, or being able to hit on the beat of like the drum and feel like, because this is kind of just a way in which we kind of feel like we have to go through life, take a step at a time. Mm-hmm. But then we realized essentially that actually it goes against the true feeling of grief, where it does feel frantic and chaotic, and you feel like a sense of no control. You are, there is so much agency as to what you do. It almost feels like you are, there's so much options. I don't know what to do. And the only way you could capture that is by not restricting the player to a rhythm or a beat. They have to find their own beat and discover their own beat as they go along. And that's, so elements like that, you also have to kind of play with and toy with artistically in order to feel like you are telling an authentic experience, and balance it with gameplay as well. That was a long rant.
No, it was great. I actually minor in classical civilization. And one of the things I did do was look at the importance of masks, primarily in, Greek tragedy and plays. But I'm glad you bring that up, because masks do allow you to don a completely different personality.
Yeah.
You can be a middle-aged man in real life with, temper issues. But once you put on a mask, you can become anything. Mm-hmm. Like, it's in your actions, it's in how you behave. When you put on the mask, you show your true emotions. Mm-hmm. So yeah, mm-hmm. I thank you for sharing that. I do have one more question, and then I'll hand it back off to Harold. With the rise of Gamergate 2.0, are you thinking about the reception of ZOW after release, or are you more focused on the hard work that went into this game and what it represents emotionally?
Yeah, I honestly, I'm more focused on the work that we've all done and kind of pushing it that way, because again, I think for me, truly, the game comes from a very pure place and an honest place. And as long as I can be honest and truthful, and the team can be as honest and truthful as they can be, that's all that matters, man.
Yes.
Like, and I think like that is, and that's the beauty of art. I feel it's like you can put something so personal and yourself into it, and then you can come around and come off it feeling like you've achieved something really cool and feel really proud of it. And yes, some people might like it, some people might not, but as long as you feel comfortable with what you've done, that's truly what matters, because then you grow from that. So yeah, I don't even think about it. Like, because I'm just honestly, because it's about being truthful to the art that you want to represent and do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Abubakar, I was just thinking before we let you go that you're playing Alan of Hull.
Yeah.
The House of the Dragon, which is also a very myth-based fiction.
Yeah.
So I know you can't talk about specific things, but what I was going to ask is, how did you think about ZOW at all while you were in this different world of House of the Dragon?
I think the one thing that, I've been very fortunate to have worked with some really cool artists who've conjured these really cool worlds.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I've realized is very similar, or the connecting tissue, is that they have focused on the human aspects and what makes us human in order to paint these worlds. It's almost like, you look at House of the Dragon, for example. The dragons are important, but they're not really important. Like, you could remove the dragons and put anything else in their stead, and that it would still be an incredibly successful show because of it's about the dynamic between people. And I think like that was something that, you know, again, having, you know, playing Alan of Hull, for example, he's grieving in a very different way than Zhao is, you know? And I think like, you know, because of the fact that, you know, Alan's, you know, you don't know who Alan's father is, or you know who Alan's father is, but you can't really talk about it because he's a bastard and all that kind of stuff, right? But he's, you know, there is this sense of a loss there of what, you know, he wanted and what he wanted to gain there. So that's a very human thing that's almost timeless, that be there dragons or none, it's still a very pertinent and powerful kind of, you know, journey to go on. In the same way, like you look at Zhao, like there's a reason also why I kind of chosen these two different time frames or these two different spaces, the fantastical and sort of the modern / futuristic time, is because grief is timeless. It will, you know, no matter, you know, where you are or who you are, the feelings or the journey is one that will always be had. And I think like that's what, you know, I really had taken from the writings and the worlds that have been conjured by these, you know, these big shows, is ultimately it isn't about how fantastical or how epic it is. It's about the human relationship and about the human truth. And as long as you stick to that, it can be said anywhere, and it almost adds the other level of flavor and power to it because of the truth of where it's coming from.
And that's from where we began as human beings, right around the campfire, telling some stories and telling some humanity.
Yeah.
So, and you know, whether it's Zhao or Shogun or House of the Dragon, pretty much anything begins with a good story. So, Abubakar, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today at our Playing with Purpose program at nygamecritics.com. Best of luck with the game.
Thank you.
It's beautiful on many levels. So I again wish you best of luck, and hope that there's a second part.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, man.